Good morning,
Good morning.
everyone. Good morning, everyone who's following us at home. Always a pleasure seeing everyone every time we come here on Sunday, especially when we address important topics. And I really loved the beginning phrase of the message that Biga brought us, in which Joanna de Angelis stated, think in terms of eternal life. That is so important, especially when we address the issue of children, kids. I do not have children, so I can't even begin to understand the challenges, the difficulties that comes with educating another person. It is hard enough educating ourselves, and I can't even imagine how it is to be responsible for someone else and guiding them and molding them as that beautiful piece of art that eventually will be as a woman or man in society. And a woman held a babe against her bosom and said, "Speak to us of children." And he said, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. For their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. This is such a beautiful, beautiful poem from the prophet Khalil Gibran. And when we started thinking about the study, I automatically thought of this. Because although this is not a spiritist poem, it kind of is. It kind of is. When we consider children as being not from us, but through us, we're talking about the eternal, the immortal spirit. And some people actually did a bit of study in trying to understand this metaphor in which we have the archer, we have the bow, and we have the arrow, in which it can be explained in such a way that the archer is God. The parents represent the bow, and the children are the living arrows. And we see this beautiful metaphor, and when we study Spiritism, understanding that God has entrusted parents, whether physical, whether adopted children, whichever it may be, people that are responsible with the children, they've been entrusted with such a mission. So paternity, maternity, yes, it is considered a mission. In today's age, one of the hardest. I am 46 years old. I know, I don't look it, right? 46, but when I was 13, and when I arrived in the US, there was none of the things we see 12, 13-year-olds having access to. As a matter of fact, we went to visit a couple of friends in Atlanta, and they have a 6-year-old, and I was playing school with her. I sat there, and I was the student, she was the teacher. She was 6, and she's like, "You know what?" I said, "What?" She said, "I'm going to school next week. I'm starting school." And I said, "Wow, that is really cool." And she said, "Yeah, I went to visit today. I met Mrs. Conrad." And I said, "Well, that's great." And she's like, "And we have computers in class." I said, "You know, when I was your age, all we had were notebooks. She's like, what? Yeah, notebooks and pencils. She's like, what? And she looked at me that way. It's a whole other generation. It's a whole other world that we have. I mean, if we look at babies today, there's a really cute video of a 2-year-old looking at a magazine, going like this with a little finger as if trying to amplify what she's reading, because they already come for the type of world that we are living under today. Yes, think in terms of eternal life, because when we talk about children, we're talking about the immortal spirits, beings that have arrived at our homes in an entire universe in itself. Terry, how many children do you have?
Well, we have 4.
You have 4.
Right.
4 kids. All of them the same? Personality-wise?
Oh, no, they're night and day.
Night and day. Night and day. So we have here parents with 4 children that arrived from God, through them, but from God, to be educated, to be guided. And I know that Terry is a faithful man. He's full of faith. And I'm sure that kids in his home, perhaps if they were to describe him, they might describe him the very same way I do. I don't live with Terry, but from meeting him, automatically, you know, and whenever we finish a prayer and I hear loudly behind me, amen, we see that Terry is somebody that is deeply connected to God. And I'm certain that that was also very present in his home. But 4 kids, 4 distinct personalities, educating them. Easy? Was it easy?
Oh, it was just
a walk in the park.
Walk in the park.
A walk in the park, right? So this is what we're dealing with. We see parents that have been prepared in the spirit world to receive the souls that they have been entrusted with. Whether these children came through natural childbirth or not, parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, whatever, responsible adults were prepared for that tiny universe that arrives at their home. And at times, the most things we've seen sometimes, even in the fraternal assistance that we have at the Spiritist Center, is questioning, am I doing the right thing? Am I a good parent? Am I a good mother? Am I a good friend? Did I fail somewhere? When we see some of their children, today adults, have been guided with morals, with standards, with ethics, yet having an entire different path chosen by them. Living arrows sent forth into their destinies. And so Spiritism guides us, because when we talk about personalities, when we talk about children, we're talking about the eternal, the immortal spirit that reincarnates with their own habits, tendencies, nature, characteristics, values, characteristics that have been developed through time, through different reincarnation. Which is why in Terry's home, he might see one child being this way with animals and the other being a complete different way. I'm not sure if that's the case, but just saying. In Marcelo's household, we saw the 2 of them, their mother teaching them not to step on the ants, you know, as they were walking. And she would say, imagine that you are a giant and the tiny ant looks up and see that huge foot, you know, you don't want to step on it. Reverence for life, like Albert Schweitzer. And so even up to today, my sister-in-law cannot fathom to kill a roach.
That's true.
It's true. I'm not making this up. There's Marcelo saying that it is true. So here we are. We were tiny children, and then we went through the phases of infancy, which according to Spiritism is extremely important. What is the usefulness of a spirit having to go through childhood? And the answer, a spirit incarnates in order to perfect itself. During childhood, it is more accessible to the impressions it receives, and which may assist in its progress. First is in charge of its education, should contribute towards this goal. And when we look at this very important phase in which we go through, whether we had the wholesome life that we think it needs to be, all of us went through it, receiving the impressions, perhaps even going through difficult childhood to see if our core values, that which we already passed in previous existences, takes place, takes hold. And so we see several cases of people that were born in difficult situations, perhaps even in the communities, the slums in Brazil as we see, and they have succeeded. They have been able to excel and become human beings that are actually not going through vices, drugs, that actually have this faithfulness to God and this faith that allows them to see life in a whole different way. We may also see kids that are brought up in very controlled and organized and disciplined homes, and yet when they reach adolescence, they start allowing their true self to emerge. And they start developing that sense, where are these habits, these tendencies coming from? It's what we were reading from Khalil Gibran's poem, because they have their own identity. I'm just going to read again when he says, at the end, decision lies in the hands of children. It doesn't matter how much sometimes a parent may try to educate. At the end, the decision lies in the hands of children. That's what he says. And of course, it's not to say that we shouldn't educate, we shouldn't bring the notion of God. Today, more and more teenagers are not believing in existence of God. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in Jesus. They actually think that a lot of the things that we see happening, that have happened in history, didn't happen at all. So what's missing at home? What is missing in our society today? Marcelo has mentioned his nephew, talking to him about God. God doesn't exist. I mean, what about all the inequalities we see in the world? Where is God? When we see so much evil happening in the world. But the interesting thing about the youth today, how old is she? 12. Is that unlike us? When our parents said, because I said so, today, the new generation likes to think. They want a reason. They want to understand why. Because I said so no longer is sufficient. They are rational thinking. They're a different generation. So when we see them talking, tell me about God, we better be prepared to have arguments that make sense and allow them to question. When I was young, I wasn't allowed to question. My God, if I said why, right? If I questioned my father or the adult, the teacher, we were frowned upon. We weren't allowed to question. Today's kids, they want to know why. Why? Because of this. Yeah, but why? Until it eventually makes sense to them. And this is the type of guidance that we are talking about, which Spiritism guides us through. But is it easy? No, it's not easy. And then we see question 385, in which Kardec asked, what is the reason for the change that occurs in its character at a certain age, particularly upon leaving adolescence? Is it the spirit that changes? In terms of the immortal spirit, we need to have an eternal life view. It is because the spirit recapitulates its true nature and reveals who it really was before its present incarnation. You do not know the secrets that children conceal behind their innocence. You do not know what they are, what they have been, or what they will be. Nevertheless, you love and cherish them as though they were a part of you. Again, I'm not a parent, but if we look at our godchildren, if we look at kids, we see them as innocent. We are automatically drawn to them to love and cherish them as if they were part of us. And there is a reason behind that innocence, which, by the way, Christ used an example. Let the children come to me, utilizing that apparent innocence and purity that we see in kids. Those things that we usually see that eventually kids grow out of and their true essence comes about. And so the spirits, they will continue. That's a very long answer, and Kardec comments, this happens to such a degree that the love of a mother for her child is reputed to the greatest love that one being may have for another. They say that nothing is like a mother's love. True? But sometimes that is not the case. Right? Sometimes that is not the case. Sometimes the child is going to see that love reflected on a grandmother, on a grandfather, on an uncle, a godfather, whatever the case may be. Because we're talking about a spirit basically recapitulating previous existences. And at times, a spirit will reincarnate at a home where enemies are, called upon to make up for the past. It's that delicate necklace filled with knots that needs to very carefully be tended to make all the tiny little knots go away until eventually we have a beautiful necklace. That's what reincarnation is for. And in family life, we see spirits being called to work together to take out the knots of the very fragile link that is that beautiful necklace that unites them. And then they will continue. Why do even strangers feel sweet affection and display tender benevolence towards a child? Do you know? No? Well, I will explain it to you. And they say, children are beings from God, which God has sent into a new existence. That much we know. So that God is not accused of excessive severity, God gives them all the appearance of innocence. Can we imagine if we were to receive in the child, knowing there lies in an enemy from the past? We talk a lot about Missionaries of the Light, which is that book, which I believe is the third book from the collection of Andreia Marshall's Life in the Spirit World, and the very well-known process and planning of the reincarnation of Segismundo. Sigi, as David used to like to call Segismundo, Sigi. So there is that process of Segismundo, who actually had been in the very difficult triangle relationship between Adelino, Raquel, and him. Adelino being married to Raquel in a previous existence, Segismundo comes, seduces her, then he kills the husband to stay with her, so a past enemy. But prior to reincarnating, they decided to forgive each other and reincarnate together. Adelino, the person who had killed Adelino in the past, Segismundo, comes back as his son. Now, can we imagine if Adelino remembered him? Because subconsciously, he brought this notion, oh my God, I have this spirit is going to reincarnate. And when his wife talks about getting pregnant again, nope, I don't want it. He doesn't remember, but subconsciously he does. It's that fear of encountering the enemy from the past. But then when they give in, that innocence that comes through to a child, it's difficult not to look at that real chubby face and melt. I mean, it's just so hard not to, right? I remember Susanna's kids, Tati and Jake. I remember them to today. I remember Tati jumping from the couch here with Marcelo. Marcelo dying he was so tired because he would pick her up and bounce her and bounce her and bounce her. But the love, because kids take that out from us. We just want to take care of them. We want to play with them. We want to love them. But then they tell us that we should also educate them. Educate them. Which is why we see the Spirit of Truth telling us that the very first commandment is to love ourselves and instruct. So love and instruction walks side by side. Because what we see in the new generation are spirits that have been very much matured, intellectually speaking, but they tell us that they need to also be able to develop the moral qualities. And then they continue. The innocence does not truly reflect their state of advancement in relation to what they previously were. In reality, it is a picture of what they ought to be. Nevertheless, it is not merely for the children's sake that God gives them such an appearance. It is also and especially for the parents whose love is necessary in their fragility. Such love would be extraordinarily weakened if the parents were faced with a quarrelsome and bad-tempered character. On the other hand, supposing their children to be good and gentle, parents give them all their affection and surround them with the tenderest care. It is interesting. I'm not sure if you guys feel the same way, but it is quite interesting when we see a child and we feel that benevolence towards that fragility, that frail being in front of us. We want to take care of it. The same happens with the elderly. I don't know if you guys feel the same way. At the beginning of the spirit's life and at the very end, it's as if they're able to draw that from us. Because sometimes parents also are not the best. And the gospel, according to Spiritism, will tell their children to honor parents, honor mother and father. That if the parents were not everything that the child deserved, that even then it was not up to them to punish their parents. It's up to God, but that they have a duty to take care of their parents. Interesting, right? Because as far as relationships are concerned, as far as when we're placed together in the immediate family, there is a duty, which is what the spirits tell us about this obedience and resignation. Obedience, the consent of reason, and then resignation, the consent of the heart. And continuing, when children no longer need the protection and assistance that has been given to them for 15 or 20 years, their true and individual character emerges in all its nakedness. But the spirits also will tell us in the gospel according to Spiritism that if we really, really, really want to be hands-on, if we still have this opportunity, that from birth at the cradle, we can detect the character of the child. We can see if they're wicked by the way that they play with others, the way they react. We can see if they're kind. We can see if they have certain moral vices that need to be worked on, if they're selfish. But for that, the parents need to be paying attention. Well, Andreia, I didn't know about all of this. Now my child is 15 and acting up. There is still chance, because we're talking about the eternal spirit. Renewal is always available. As much as it is for us, grown-ups, which in reality we're still all kids, spiritually speaking, it is also always available for that teenager as well. So the fragility of the early years renders them flexible and accessible to the counsels of experience and to those who should aid their progress. And this is why we see such as the duty that God entrusts to parents, a sacred mission for which they will have to answer. What have you done to the little one that I have entrusted you with? Well, if in the case sometimes we see all the love, all the education, all the money towards the intellectual education, everything a parent does for that child, and still when they're in the late adolescence years or early adult, they're acting up, the parent can have a clear conscience that they've done everything that they could. And only one parent can say whether they have or not. And even when they have, they will question themselves. So here's a note for parents who may be watching. Just be kind with yourself. In knowing that educating another being is so hard, take a breather and understand that it is really quite hard. And doing everything that we can is actually what God asks from us in anything that we do in life. Anything that we do in life. Doing everything that we can. And then people question, there is actually further questions from 386 forward about the tendencies. Do children inherit the parents' tendencies? And so they will tell us, as far as the law of inheritance is concerned, we see on Missionaries of the Light, they say human beings inherit tendencies and not qualities. Do they? Tendencies surround persons being reborn from the very first days of their life, not only in their transitory body, but also in the general environment into which they have been called to live in order to advance. Qualities are the result of the incarnate soul's individual endeavor at defending, educating, and improving itself in the blessed arena of new experiences. Which is why we see sometimes parents that are so lacking in so many ways purposely, and kids that thrive, that actually become the parents even when they're in their teenage years, right? And so they will continue. This is in Andreia Lewis. They will continue in telling us, if the reincarnated spirit is inclined toward inferior tendencies, it will develop them when it finds them again in the scenario of human experiences, thereby wasting valuable time and sublime opportunity to evolve. On the other hand, if a soul returns to the world and remains willing to work for self-renewal, for self-growth, it will overcome any inferior demands from its body or the environment, and it will triumph over the adverse conditions. So if we see, for example, a spirit that has been reincarnated because they need to go through that trial, through that test that they have to pass, where in previous existences they were inclined towards drinking, doing drugs, gambling, whatever the case may be, but they reincarnate with that tendency to overcome it, and they're true to themselves, and they're born into the very same scenario, they may be able to overcome it and become quite the opposite of what their parents were. The same can be said for spirits that come that are very challenging, and they're placed in a home where there is God present, where Jesus is not a mystical figure, but rather the guide, role model for every human being on the face of the earth. And because of that one incarnation, where parents were called upon to serve in Jesus' name towards educating that child and guiding it back to the flock. You guys remember? There are 99 sheep. If one is lost, Jesus goes after, leaves all the other 99 and goes rescue the one that is missing. And often that one is placed in a home because Jesus is there. The gospel at home, so necessary and urgent in today's world. So it's not enough for the child to go to the temple, to the church, the Spiritist center, if at home they don't find the reflection of what is being proposed as far as the educating of the soul is concerned. It won't work. When I was a kid, my father, there was no religion in my home. But I went to Catholic school. My father had this idea that kids are to choose the religion that they should have. And when I was 13, I ended up at the Spiritist Center because my best friend's mother had opened the Spiritist Center in Coconut Creek. So I would spend the weekends at her home. Eventually, when I was 14, that was my first boyfriend, so it was really cool, For 3 years, we dated. I'm so glad that was my first boyfriend, because every weekend, I went to the Spiritist Center. And I found a peace that in my personal home, I did not have. My father is listening, he's okay with it, okay? He's discarnate, he's okay. We are in peace with each other. Can you imagine my father adopting a child? Susanna adopted too. And we think, is there a connection between these souls? Of course there is. The ties that unite us, the spiritual ties that unite us. This is why a lot of times that adopted child will be more connection with that adopted parent than a biological one. It's quite interesting, we see that. But anywho, I was to choose my own religion. I didn't really choose, I walked into, which is Spiritism. I walked to it, it made sense to me because I had questions. I wanted to know many, many things that I did not find in Catholic school. As a matter of fact, we were not to question the nuns. We were not to pose questions about anything. That was a sign of respect. But today, as we mentioned, kids, they're reasoning. They want to think, they want to ask, they want rational answers to suffice for them. So if we consider this new generation, what we are going to see is the benevolent spirits telling us that we will always have the light of inner freedom inside, showing us the way upward, and so do kids. And practicing to ascend spiritually, we will always improve. That is the law. But they will also say that this type of thing only works with kids if they see at home a reference, an example. Because speaking to them and not walking the talk also doesn't really make an impact. It doesn't work. The signs of time is one of the components that we use for study today. It's in Genesis, Miracles and Predictions According to Spiritism, which is on chapter... Marcelo, what's the chapter? 18? I'm not sure. Susanna may look at it, find out, so I can properly tell people here. What is the chapter on this slide? Oh, 27. You're close. I wrote down here, chapter 27.
Don't have 27 chapter. Genesis or Gospel?
Maybe it's, I forget now. Susanna, can you look at it? The New Generation, Genesis?
Genesis chapter 18.
18, chapter 18. Thank you. Sorry, guys. Chapter 18, Genesis, Miracles and Predictions According to Spiritism. And it's called the Signs of Times. Let's talk about parenthood is no joke, right? We've already addressed that. And so the benevolent spirits will come and bring information. Allan Kardec is going to say, what people need nowadays is not only the development of their intelligence, but the elevation of their sentiments. The aspect of the cross, the upward and the horizontal, the one aspect when we look that we need to actually go upwards in sentiments, elevating the sentiments, this horizontal line being considered perhaps the intellect. Elevating the sentiments is what we need at this time. Why do we see so many kids today going through situations in which they're drawn to take a weapon to school and injure others? Where does that come from? Because Genesis is going to tell us in Signs of Times about the new generation that there is a lot of spirits that are going to start discarnating in masses, collective expiations in masses, who will no longer be able to reincarnate here because they're no longer aligned with the progress that has already been achieved over time. They're going to be invited to be in other planes. And this new generation that is arriving on earth at this time, that are actually inclined towards the good. I'm going to read the word that they say actually. Propensity for the good. Spirits that are actually being born, they're more advanced, but they have a propensity for the good. They're not actually benevolent spirits yet. They have a propensity. They're moldable. So they're being reincarnated. They're being placed in households or situations where that propensity is going to be worked on. It's going to be stimulated. It's going to be encouraged so that they can become that person in society, the man and the woman in the world who are going to have an impact. This is why we see today kids being, or rather graduating from university. There's a 17-year-old boy who's already, graduated from I don't know how many courses in university developing a soap for skin cancer. So they're envisioning the good for humanity. They're working towards that. And these are the kind of spirits that are reincarnating right now. So when we see this opportunity for the masses to reincarnate and we envision a world of regeneration, which by the way is not yet a plane without trials, without expiations. It's not. There will still be pain. There will still be trials. There will be still spirits inclined towards the evil, but they'll have conscious about that. They will be aware of it. And so this is what they say. Charged with founding the age of moral progress, the new generation is distinguished by an overall precocious intelligence and reason, combined with an innate sentiment of the good and spiritualist beliefs. Spiritualist beliefs. If properly guided, understanding this, can we imagine what the face of the earth will look like? kids being guided with these beliefs, with this propensity for the good. They tell us an unmistakable sign of a certain degree of previous advancement is what we are going to see. Consequently, it will not be composed exclusively of eminently high-order spirits, but of those who have already progressed, are predisposed to assimilating progressive ideas, and are capable of upholding the regenerative movement. That's quite something, right? I only wish to still be alive to see some of these beings and the impact that they're going to have. And sometimes they might be in our homes, and we are missing the opportunity of guiding them properly. On posthumous works, we're going to see Allan Kardec telling us that suicides in this process of renewal, this mixtures between beings that have a propensity for the good and those that are still inclined towards evil, that will be suicide increasing in incredible proportion even among children. When was posthumous works written? 1860 something, right?
It was a compilation of many messages from
compilation.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's published in 1873.
Regardless, it talks about what is happening today. We see kids hanging themselves at 9, 8 years old. Social media, which is actually something that should be used towards good, we see it being used for materialist ideas, for the illusion of perfection based on what is the exterior, what is happening outside, not rather what is inside. We see beautiful boys and girls that in social media have all the appearances of having a wholesome, noble, beautiful life. They're smiling, they're traveling, they have girlfriend, boyfriend. It seems like their family life is ideal, but then all of a sudden we get the message in the news. Influencer so-and-so died at the age of 13 by hanging herself. So there is an urgency to talk about the aspect of spirituality, especially about the immortality of the spirits in our own homes. Because according to the benevolent spirits, the very first thing that a suicide spirit is faced with is the disappointment, because they realize that life goes on. And they all wasted opportunity. And for a parent that perhaps has gone through this very painful situation, because I cannot imagine what it will be like, having done all that they can, Spiritism comes with this consoling message that we find that although we are responsible for educating our children, at the end, we need to remember what Khalil Gibran said: your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. So the parent is going to educate for the world, to be a man and woman of society, not belonging to society. That is in society based on the law of progress, law of society, law of progress. To progress and allow for this movement, this regenerative movement that the benevolent spirits tell us. They've done all they can, so their conscience should be clear. And if they haven't done all they can, that there are countless ways in which a parent can make amends for past mistakes. And that's the consoling aspect of Spiritism. And I just want to leave us with a message from the book, The Way, the Truth, and the Light, chapter 12, which is called Educating in the Home. And it is found a message from John, chapter 8, verse 38. You too, do what you have seen your father do. In today's world, an educating gift, giving free rein to the human instinct is encouraged. The old teachings involving developing one's character in the home are being forgotten little by little. Nevertheless, society will be compelled to readjust its purposes sooner or later. Human parents must be the individual's first mentors. Setting up the right environment depends on their loving mission. In today's unwatchful society, corrupted environments point to the fact that there are bad parents mixed with those who, at the cost of huge sacrifices, are able to maintain as much security as possible against the threat of disorder. The domestic endeavor can never be a release valve for unproductive pleasures because it constitutes working and cooperating with God. Parents are co-creators. The men and women who try to be parents while at the same time enjoying the pleasures of earthly life are blind, and they will finish their insane effort, spiritually speaking, in the common grave of uselessness. In vain do sociologists strive to replace education in the home with unintelligible substitutes which only poison the soul. Only a spirit that has understood the parenthood of God, above all, is able to escape the law that says that children will always imitate their parents, even if the parents are wicked. Let us heed Christ's word. And if you have children, take the Master's statement as a warning. Although the message ends in this way, we see Emmanuel's care and concern for today's world and society and home lifestyle. And I personally dedicate the study for all the proud parents who took it upon themselves in this life for sacrificing the pleasure that they once had at a young age to commit in educating other beings, other children, whether their own or whether other parents' children. And I end this with a lot of love and a very compassionate hug, for I understand that although I'm not a parent, there can't be greater sacrifice than having a child and educating it for today's society. So thank you so much. Really highly recommend reading and studying further because 40 minutes is not enough for such a important topic. Have a good Sunday.